This conference will now be recorded.
Dobrý den.
No, pojďte blíž. Blíž.
Mikrofon je tady.
Tak co paní docentka nemohla?
Ona se maximálně zkusí připojit zvenku, protože je na chirurgii.
Neplánovaně.
So we are all, we can start.
Zlatko, byl k tomu nějaký link k tomu meetingu?
Můžeme to poslat paní docence.
Ona to má?
Jo.
Tak už to nahráváme.
Jo.
Perfect. Wonderful. Well, thank you very much again for your time. I think it was about a year ago. I don't know the exact date, but I remember sitting in the same room that you are sitting in now, and I was able to present the solution back then with Martin was with me and some colleagues from IQVIA as well. And some things have changed actually in the meantime in centraXX. So we have some new functionality, some new features, and the user interface looks a little more modern because now I will be showing you a little bit of centraXX 4. It's the newest version. Back a year ago it was centraXX 3. So to some of you who may have some recollection of the system, it hasn't changed. The architecture has not changed radically, or the principles behind the system, but the touch and feel has updated a little bit. So what I want to do today is I want to use this time for as much interaction as possible. I find sometimes the virtual conferences are a little bit difficult for interaction. I can see you, but I can only see you about this large, so I can't really see your faces. I can't react as well as I would like to, but I would really like to encourage you to just speak up, raise your hand, speak up, say something if you have a question, if you want to see something in more detail, if we want to discuss something, and feel free also to say it in Czech. I do not understand Czech, but we have a colleague I have a colleague of mine in the line as well, so Teresa can do any translating if needed. So let me go ahead and jump in. And what I want to start with is, because this was you sent me a nice catalog of questions, which was very helpful. And the first that you said was to show the electronic patient record in detail and explain how the data are imported from hospital information system into centraXX. So let me just go ahead and start sharing my screen and find the correct browser. Okay. Great. Okay, are you seeing my screen? Sorry, is that can you see my screen? Am I sharing already?
Well, it's relatively small, but we can see it.
It's relatively small. Okay, let me try to zoom in a little bit. Is this a little bit better?
Yeah, much better.
Great, fantastic. Thank you. So I have logged in, and I'm logged in as the admin to the system. If you recall, we have a very detailed rights and roles management system in centraXX. So you can set up different users with different access rights to the system. And in this case, I'm the admin, and so I'm God of the system. I can see everything, I can do everything, I have access to all of the forms, I can change all of the forms, I can see all of the patients and all of the patient identifiers in the system. If you recall, we have the possibility in centraXX to de-identify data sets. So what we can do is we can set up researchers who have access to certain records, but will not be able to see who the patient is. So it's kind of like this. It would just be an identifier, a pseudonym identifier, and the researcher would not know who this person is. But we can also set it up so that treating physicians with access to the EMR, to the hospital information system, and to all of the identifiers, because these are their patients, have access to the same records, and of course they can see the identifiers. So we can set it up to function both ways. Now let me go ahead, and because this was the first question, and start by showing the patient record. And this is the main component in centraXX where we help you or help our clients collect data longitudinally for clinical research purposes. And so this data would be coming ideally if we can get the interface to function from the hospital information system. And I'll show you an example here in a little bit, what that actually looks like, what that really looks like, how an HL7 message would come in, and we would parse it and we would import the data into the fields for which data is provided. But first, let me just kind of give you a little bit of a walkthrough and show you, okay, what type of data sets do we collect? So first of all, of course, just the very basic demographics data, the date of birth, the age, the identifiers, and you can have multiple identifier per patient, so they can have a study site ID, they can have a medical record number from the hospital information system, and then they can have X numbers of additional external patient IDs. So if they're in multiple projects and they have multiple identifiers, not a problem. We can keep track of all of that. Of course, title, name, first name, last name, date of birth, date of death, birth name, etc. All of these data fields here are possible. There's some extended data here as well, marital status, citizenship, etc., etc. Now, it's important to know that centraXX can function as a primary source system as well. So it really kind of depends. I understand that in your case, you're not looking to use centraXX as the primary system because you're building out a hospital information system to keep track of all of this data. So we really just want to be the system that's importing these data sets. But, and that's why I mentioned this, there may be some data items, some fields where it does make sense to actually capture data using the centraXX system. And one of those examples, so this is the demographics that we see here, and we see a little bit of an overview of, okay, how many data items do we have? How many visits in the hospital have we documented? How many consents have we documented? Tumor information, et cetera. So there's a little bit of an overview here. But one of those fields where I think it might make sense, and I don't know, and these are the items that we try to figure out in the projects with our clients. So we come over and we sit down with you in workshops and we use a whiteboard and we try to figure out, okay, what's your process? So for example, one of the items that a lot of our clients use the system for to actually create data in system as in centraXX as the primary system is consent information. So you can come into the system and you can create different types of consents with structured data points. So for example, if you have an informed consent that has different components to it, you can set that up in centraXX and you can say, okay, this patient gave us a partial consent form. So they signed the actual form. It was a paper-based form, and they said, yes, we can recontact them, we can save the data, we can do all this stuff, but they don't want us to run DNA analyses with their blood, for example. All right, so you can keep track of that. You can say, okay, from when was this form? How long is it valid? When was it signed? So let's just say it was signed today, and let's say, I don't know, it's valid for a few months or whatever. So this is actually used to capture that data, and you can upload the signed form as well here. And then you can save this, and now you have the informed consent that is traceable here. Right, you have the structured information attached to it, and you can keep track of it. You can keep track of what happens to this consent form. So for example, if there was a withdrawal of consent, you can come in here and you can start documenting in the system. You can say, okay, you either edit this, or actually, sorry, I was looking for revoking, right, withdrawing the consent. And now you can document, okay, they sent us an email, so I'm going to attach this email, and they said, I want to withdraw complete withdrawal of consent for this. So there are fields in centraXX, and I'll go through them. We don't have time. We only have about 2 hours for today, so we don't have time to go through everything in total detail, but I do want to just refresh your memory of what you saw about a year ago. And so there are fields in here where I would say, hey, we can even get started without a full integration to the hospital information system. And I know, and I fully admit I'm biased because I want to get the system up and running, and I think there's enough to do to start implementation work while Steiner is still working and while we can consider, okay, how exactly do we want to build out this HL7 integration? But there are some fields in here where you can say, okay, I'm coming in and this is data that's either we're not even capturing it in the hospital information system, potentially, I don't know the hospital information system, or it just makes sense to start capturing it here because we'll see in the later stage of the demonstration how we can use the data for patient identification, for example, for finding patients, suitable candidates for screens or for clinical trials. So there's other fields in here, episodes data. So this would be visits to the clinic, for example. So when did someone come into which department? What was the stay type? All right. So for example, also for clinical trials, some of our clients use this to document stays or visits, actual physical visits in the hospital, because what we use it for is we use it to link these stays to specific other events in the system so that you have more of a logical connection, a chronology in this record where you can say, okay, this sample was taken for this baseline visit. And so then that also becomes usable later in the search. Show me all samples connected to a specific visit in the hospital or to a specific episode is what they're called here. Then we have diagnostic information, and this would be using catalogs to document certain diagnoses that were made. So this could be, and we have the possibility here to upload various types of catalogs. So of course we support standards such as the ICD-10, but you can also build out your own custom catalogs that you may have, and maybe different departments have different types of diagnosis codes that they have in catalogs for specific types of diseases. So you can upload those catalogs here as well, and then you can use them by filtering. So I don't know, I can search for fever and I can start actually documenting the ICD-10. Again, I fully understand this is most likely functionality that you would have in the hospital information system that you're not looking to duplicate with the centraXX system. I absolutely understand that. But I do think it is important to know, okay, you could theoretically start documentation in the centraXX system if it's not yet available, if we don't have the integration yet. We can start documenting it here as well for at least maybe for a subgroup of patients, maybe not for all patients, but for those relevant for clinical research, just so that you have some information in the record that becomes searchable. And then at a later stage, once we have the interface working, we could replace that work stream where it's okay, now it's no longer being entered into centraXX, it's just being entered into the primary system, which would be the SONUS system. Okay, so diagnostic information, procedural information. So this would be things such as operations, such as various types of treatments that may be codable and may be documented here in the system. In Germany, we use what's called the OPS. It's like an operation and procedural code. I'm not certain. This is a German code or a German catalog, so I'm not certain again if there's an equivalent in the Czech Republic where we could say, okay, let's build out this catalog and just upload it here and make it searchable here. So again, so that we're trying to get away from as much free text as possible, and we're trying to support coding certain findings and certain operations procedures as well as diagnoses. Medication data. Again, same thing. Typically, we are not the primary source system for this data. Typically, our users or the client's users would not come into the system and go in here and say, okay, now I'm adding documentation on medication that was prescribed or that was given. But it is possible. So it can be used to do that. So we always say, okay, if you don't have a system to do this yet, use it. If you have the primary source system in place, of course, we can ingest the data, we can import the data and make it visible here. Tumor documentation. Same thing. We can keep track of information here on tumors. We can keep track of histology data, of classification data. So for example, T&M codes can be documented here. And again, it's the same thing. It can be used as a primary system to add information, but it can also be used to import information. And maybe let me just take a quick break right there. So for example, for tumor information, is there one system that you have in place to document oncology cases? Is there one system that's used campus-wide? Can anyone speak to that?
Well, I think yes, because we use the ICD 10 system as you do. And there's a question, you've got the date, how do you find the date of diagnosis there? Is there some set standard or that is used in Germany?
So the date of diagnosis is within the ICD-10 coding. Here, if we go in here, what our clients do is we have a diagnosis date here, and then there's a certain there's a certainty that can be given for the diagnosis. So we have a diagnosis certainty here. So there's different stages. So what our clients would do is they would have a non-confirmed diagnosis. There is always a date assigned to the ICD-10 code that's given. So anytime an ICD-10 is created, there must be a date, and then we can add a certainty that can be changed, that can be updated. So from a non-confirmed diagnosis, we have a confirmed diagnosis at a later stage. Is that answering the question?
Yes, I think yes. This is something that we still have to work on because here it is not certain if it is the date of pathology specimen or date when first the diagnosis somebody mentioned in the report.
Yeah.
So, but it's an important date because from this time point you count then survival and time to
Right.
progression and all this data that are important for
Yeah.
everything.
Yeah.
But this is question of methodology. Jesse, can I ask a question? When
Sure.
you when you showed the episode diagnosis procedures, all the data is able to extract from hospital information system through HL7 messages. So it's
Yes.
necessary for us to have all modality HIS uh, in AL7 exchange format.
Is correct. So it is possible. It is possible for all of the data that we see here, and I would have to look through if there may be, not sure if survey data, for example, that's a module that we have ourselves, so maybe there's no HL7 data that goes into there. But pretty much for anything else, our HL7 listener can handle that and can import data if we have it, if there's another system that's sending it to us, and we can interpret it and we can import it and show it as you see it here without any manual entry here. So it would come from the source system, it would come from the hospital information system, and yes, we are capable of doing it via HL7. I would not. I mean, again, I'm from Kairos, so that's why I would say this is not a condition to use centraXX. It doesn't have this HL7 connection does not have to pre-exist for it to make any sense to use centraXX, because there are applications in the system where I would say this can be used fully standalone without any HL7 integration and can add value to operations. But yes, I agree with you. This is data that can come from HL7, and the more that we can get, and the better the integration, or the more fleshed out it is, the better, of course. So we absolutely support that. Yes.
So for us, it's important to impact on Steiner to have all possible data in AH7 format. Because when what I heard last Wednesday, I was a little
Yes.
bit surprised. And maybe I wasn't alone.
Yes, I agree with that. I want to be very careful because I do not know any contracts between, I'm not going to speak about other vendors, right? So I work for Kairos, so I'm not going to say anything else. But yes, what we are used to from the German market is hospital information systems creating an HL7 stream. That's what we call it. And this HL7 stream can either be sent to applications directly, so they could, the hospital information system could send us this data, this HL7 stream, to our HL7 listener. That's what it's called. And the technology, the listener, is basically just reading this long string of data and parsing out, recognizing, okay, this is the beginning of the message, this is the end of the message, and these are the message types that I can interpret, and this is the data that I can fetch, and then bring it into centraXX. And so that's what we're used to, is the hospital information system either provides that directly, or they send that HL7 stream to a communication server to which we can then have access. And the communication, the purpose being, the vendor doesn't want to just send the whole thing to another application to be able to listen to it. They want to like pre-filter it. So they say, no, we only certain data sets we'll make that available, but others we're going to pre-filter. So we're sending it to a communication server and then to the hospital, then to the HL7 listener from centraXX. So those are the two ways that we're familiar with. So if a vendor says, yes, they can do HL7, and ideally they can do HL7 standard, because if they're deviating from a that's what a standard is for. And from my perspective, if you're deviating too much from it, then it's not really a standard anymore. So if they say they can do that, that's what I would expect, would be basically access to at least a significant amount of the data that's being created from that hospital information system. And so that's where I agree with you. It might be helpful if you nudge the vendor, and if you work with them, and if you have that in your contracts, this needs to be interoperable. We need to be able to have other applications listen to an HL7 stream, that type of wording. And I need to be careful because I'm not a technician. I'm from the business side, so I know the basics, but I don't know the full depth, the full details of the technical integration piece. So if we need to go into that more elaborate piece, I'm happy to provide the right technical experts from our side. we were happy that we had a first conversation at all with Steiner representative. So that was good to have a first intro. But if we need to, go into further detail, we're fine on doing that. So that's my take. So apologies, I monologued a little bit.
Thank you.
Can I ask if someone from the Steiner company is connected to the conference or not?
No. It's only for MMSI and Kairos, but we had a meeting last week, and this meeting was recorded. Maybe
Yes.
you saw it.
I can get a comment. Well, I'm the head of the radiology department, and I saw the recording from the last week, and I must say that I was shocked by what we heard, because I've got the printed requirements that we made 4 years ago in May 2018, 4 years ago, where are the basic points, and one of the very basic points that it will run on HL7 standard. I don't care if it will be HL7.2 or 3 or 5 or whatever, but HL7 was our estimation to improve in the long term. So the main reason for changing the hospital information system was to get rid of the old garbage, like the check-specific tester standards and all the utilities that are made on purpose, but that are not standard. So they are very difficult to communicate, and I think the tester standard brought the bitter fruits that we are now harvesting. And but I'm not sure if, what the Steiner representative told us is that they've got nothing ready, they've got nothing available. So that was kind of cold, freezing shower for me. That's I must say.
Well, it's not a question.
No, it's not. So,
It's our problem.
No. I understand that sentiment. I was a little bit surprised also. I would have expected that they could at least provide an exam. I mean, we're not asking for much. That would have been just an HL7 message for us to play around with, to just to see, okay, how, this is what or to show you this is what the integration would look like. So I was a little bit surprised as well. But again, I'm not going to speak about another vendor.
Okay.
Okay, so go on.
Yeah, great. But no, I mean, I fully encourage this. I don't want to just be monologuing and speaking for 2 hours. So this is great to have a conversation. I absolutely appreciate that. Um, okay, so going further, maybe another field, and I know I want to be very careful about this because I did get the signals that biobanking was not front and center for the first, implementation. This was no longer your interest to really work with biobanking in centraXX. I just do want to, and I want to open this up for discussion as well. Again, this is a piece that does not require any HL7 interaction whatsoever, because this is the sample information, tracking the biospecimen, processing the biospecimen in the lab, et cetera. Most of that is carried out manually and can be documented with this system in real time without any interfacing to other systems. So I was just wondering, and I understand you want to focus mostly on the clinical trial piece, and that's absolutely fine, the study register, and I'll show you that also in a bit. But do you have another system for a biobank, or are you not planning to build out a centralized biobank? Do you have multiple different systems and everyone's going to kind of use their own system, or what's the strategy on the biobank piece? Maybe I can ask that.
We will have a biobanking module in Sonix, yeah, but
In the hospital information. Oh, that's what he was saying. Sorry. Yeah. Continue.
we haven't seen anything yet. So.
I
Oh,
can't.
okay.
And there is a problem because the biobanking module is connected with surgeon pathology and with radiotherapy. So it must be included in hospital information system or to be able to communicate with NICE in real time.
Okay. Okay, I see. So that would be basically a further component of the hospital information system to do that with that. Understood. So of course, again, we can also import data from the HL7 system to make it visible here. The advantage being, again, it becomes available for searches, right? So you can run searches and say, show me all patients that have specific tumor samples that are frozen and that have specific DNA samples and a specific diagnosis, et cetera. So all of the information that we're seeing here becomes searchable. And so the more that we can gather into donor-centric research records, the better for the searches and for the finding of patients and of data that we can reuse for trials. Okay, so understood. So that is a component in the hospital information system. Just again, as a reminder, as the information, if for whatever reason that doesn't work well or it takes long to roll out, again, the possibility of just using this functionality here to say, okay, I'm in the lab, I'm now creating the receipt of, I don't know, an EDTA whole blood sample, 6 mil, and then I use my scanner and I scan in the barcode and I just give it some certain information here. Okay, when was this sample extracted? What container is it in? What's the sample type? So there is a full biobank management system in centraXX. We can link it to consent that was given. We can link it to a diagnosis that was made. We can give it a histology code, etc. All this functionality is available here. And of course, then also tracking it throughout the life cycle in the lab. So I can say, okay, now I'm taking this whole blood sample, I'm putting it in a centrifuge, I'm extracting DNA, and I have my little tubes, and I'm putting them in my freezer in a specific position. So the full life cycle of sample management can be documented in centraXX as well. And that's actually what a lot of our clients use it for, is for biobank management. So if for whatever reason that system you haven't seen it yet and it's not finished yet or whatever down the road, and you need to try to get started with something, this might be, a preliminary solution as well in centraXX. Okay, walking further through, so you can tell this is I apologize, I've already taken half an hour, and there's just so much to show. There's so much that you can do in this record, or so much that you can gather in this record. But one or two things that I do definitely want to show also before I move on is the measurement data, measurement findings. Because the nice thing here about these measurement findings are they're based on profiles, on forms that you can build out yourself. So this really allows our clients to build out forms to capture any additional structured data points that they need to link against a patient, or to link against a biosample, or to link against a study, so that you can use these forms to append and to further document other entities. So for example, just a very basic example here, blood counts, right? And again, this can be used for primary documentation. So someone can build out a form and could say, okay, now I want to track the BMI or the smoker status or whatever else you have not seen in the standard structured data elements that I've walked through yet. This can be built out and can be added. And of course, so again, it can be used for the primary documentation, or it can be used for ingesting data, right? It can be used for HL7 data again. So if you have certain lab values in an HL7 message, this is typically where they would go. So for lab values, for any type of blood counts, or I had COVID-19 tests that I built out into the system. So these are pregnancy questionnaires. So additional structured data points become searchable again, and it's fully configurable. So you say, okay, I'm building out a form, and the form exists of 10 data items, and the first data item is a pregnancy questionnaire, yes, no, and the second data item is date of finding, and the third is whatever. You build out different data elements and plug them together as these profiles, and then can use them for documenting in what we call measurement findings. Okay, documents. Of course, there will probably be and remain to be down the road a lot of unstructured data as well. So physician's notes, PDFs, letters from former GPs that the patients bring along, consent forms, whatever you can think of, can be attached here as well. And when we're talking big data, well, there might be, for example, for genomics analytics, or for high resolution images. So when we're talking big data sets, what we would typically do is we would link to the system that you're using for those, for storing those types of data sets. So centraXX also has a raw data archive that can be used for storage of large data sets. But what we typically don't do is recommend to our clients, okay, pump all this huge data directly into the records here, directly into the centraXX database. What we would do is we would link to those systems. We would say, okay, there is a high resolution image for this patient, but it's not in centraXX. Here's the link. Now you can go and call it up and go and look at it from the other system, because typically you'll have PACS systems in place, or long-term archival archives for large data sets, so we can link to those data sets from here. Okay.
Question?
Yes.
Yes. So you accept any type of data, if it is PDF or JPEGs or whatever. Do you use some kind of OCR for automatic reading? Is it included in centraXX or not?
Yes, so it is not included in the functionality that we see here. I'll have to test real fast, but what we've done is we've built out a workflow. So we've integrated a workflow engine, which allows customizing very specific processes to document within centraXX. So one example is I want to enroll a patient into a study, but I want it to be a very specific rule-based process. So first someone has to sign off, then someone else receives a task that says, have you received a sample yet? And is everything according to the SOP? Then yes, then we can continue. So we can build out those workflows to map out standard operating procedures. And why do I mention this? Because we have built out one workflow for a client to do that, to use OCR to extract data, unstructured data from a PDF, for example, and turn it into centraXX structured data. And the example that we built out was it was looking for medication information from a PDF. So it would kind of scan through the PDF and would be able to recognize, aha, okay, there's a medication name that I know. And so it was extracting via the OCR and the NLP functionality. It was extracting from that unstructured data into structured centraXX data. And the workflow would then allow us to save and to basically it was extracting the structured information from the PDF and it made it structured and searchable again in centraXX. I'll take a look towards the end if I can find that workflow because it's pretty nice. I like it because there's a lot of valuable information in these PDFs that we can try to help extract. Now that's not magic out of the box. That does require some development and it requires another tool, to be entirely honest. This is not a centraXX component, but what the workflow does is it speaks with a Verbis is another tool from another vendor, and they do the OCR and the NLP, and they send us back the hits, basically the structured data points, and then we extract that structured data point. So there is some development there. It's not like we have out of the box tools to do this, and also in Czech, in the Czech language. I'll be honest, I've seen it in German and I've seen it in English. I'm not sure if a Verbis supports the Czech language, but there are possibilities. That's what I want to try to end this monologue again with, is to say we have built out those types of pipelines for our clients to extract structured information from PDFs. And to answer the other part of the question, yes, there's really no limitation as to what type of file you can upload here. It goes in as what's it called again? A blop, I think, in the database. So it's basically a very, very long string. And so it's really any type of file can be uploaded and attached to this record here. So Word files, CSV files, PDFs, text files, whatever. It doesn't really matter. Okay, great. So I think, again, there's a lot more that I could try to show, but I'm taking a look at the clock, so I don't want to overextend my time on just the patient record functionality, but
I have a question.
Apologies. Yeah, sure.
Where's radiology data? It's part of measurements or some other structured place in the system?
So yes, typically radiology data would probably most likely live in these types of forms. And I must be honest, I'm not an expert. I'm not a radiologist. So what type of data are you thinking about? What would be an example of something that you would need to see here or have in the system?
These data are basically both parameterized or plain text or parts of schematics or drawings. So it's a combination.
Gotcha. Okay. So I would say very honestly, yes, when we're talking parameterized data sets and findings data that you can, you really have a structured set at a specific time, there was a measurement and now we have these results, that would be in these measurement findings. And when it comes to drawings, etc., yes, we can upload them or we can link them here. We don't really have any functionality such as, okay, I'm opening up an editor, I'm opening up a drawer or something, or I can, append notes to a drawing. That's not the type of functionality we have, but we would be able to upload those drawings here and to capture any type of structured data elements in the findings. So it is not a primary radiology system here really. So, but is that also functionality that you're going to be adding to the hospital information system, or do you have a separate radiology system in place?
We have both. For clinical studies, we are using MINT. Maybe you know, it's a system for clinical studies, which is parameterized and exports some PDFs and pictures. But we have routine cases are evaluated in a hospital information system,
Hmm.
mainly
Okay.
nowadays as a plain text. But we are planning to be more parametric in the future.
Okay. Great. Yes, we always like to hear that. So, of course, we can build out forms here as well that contains free text, right? So you can build out forms and you can have the free text in a field as well. But of course, the more we can parameterize and build out as structured data forms, the better. So we try to support that with this functionality here. So yes, we would definitely just need to take a look at, okay, what is the data that you need from those systems in a system like centraXX that then allows you to run these searches, right? To identify, okay, where are the patients that have these types of values associated to them. And once we've identified, okay, what are the data sets that you need, we would build out the interfaces accordingly. So either, again, it would come from the hospital information system as HL7 messages, or we can use our FHIR interface, or we also have an XML interface that can be used. So a lot of our clients build out specific XML-based interfaces, works per REST. So you can send REST messages against the centraXX system, which would then interpret those XML messages and can import them here exactly like it for HL7. So there are ways that we would be able to say, okay, let's ingest that data from the radiology systems into these records as well.
Because nowadays used Mint software definitely can export HL7 messages to you.
Great.
So
Great. HL7 is fine. HL7 FHIR is actually sometimes even a little bit better, but HL7 is absolutely fine. That's the standard that we use. So if the system is capable of speaking that's good. That's great. But just to understand, so that system that you just referred to, is that so you use that to actually document in a clinical trial, like
yeah,
the visits and the examinations?
we are using Mint only for clinical study patients.
This is a
Okay.
system for estimating the response to oncological therapy due to imaging. So RECIST criteria system. So it
Gotcha. Okay.
works in HL7, and so this is a European system, well acknowledged. So
Great.
no problem.
Gotcha. And there's no consideration of replacing that system, correct? You're definitely planning on continuing to use that system, or would
Yes.
there be a potential of, okay, absolutely fine. Because we do also have a CTMS component here where you can document clinical trials in this system in centraXX as well. You can design a trial and you can document in forms into the system directly. So again, one potential possibility maybe down the road. But if you're happy with the existing system and you're planning on continuing using it, that's absolutely fine too. We can ingest that data as well.
Sure.
Okay, great. I've been speaking so much about, okay, this is, this can go in as HL7, this can go in as HL7. So maybe I want to demonstrate it briefly, what that would look like. And I did not have very much time for preparation. So it's a very simple example. But I just want to go and run a patient search. I hope I deleted the record correctly. There's John Smith, so let me go and search for John Smith. Okay, we do not have any patients called John Smith. Great, that's what I wanted to prove. I just ran that search and I don't have that patient. Now what I'm opening up here is, this is called an HL7 inspector, and what this is doing is this is basically mocking a hospital information system, the back end of a hospital information system. What we can do is we can take this message here and we can send it to our application. We can send it to the HL7 listener, and the HL7 listener parses it out and sends it to centraXX to upload. So I know this is very small, you're not going to see much, but this is just an example of a very small part of an HL7 message, which is I believe it's an ADT message. So there are different types of HL7 messages, and this is an ADT. ADT stands for admission, discharge, or transfer. So anytime someone is admitted into a hospital or switches beds, switches departments, or is discharged, these types of messages can be created, and we can read them and we can say, okay, we can recognize certain fields within. So for example, there's a name here, John Smith, within a certain, it's called PID segment. Those are the patient identifiers. And that might have, the address and various IDs and whatever. And everything we see here in this HL7, this is not, we did not make up this structure, right? This is not a centraXX structure. This is a standard HL7 structure. And so what I can now do is I can say, here I want to, oops, it's down there. I want to send it, and I'm sending it to a specific endpoint. And this is just my local host, so my local computer, and I'm sending it to a specific port. So we need to give it a port and give it a URL. Where is the HL7 listener located, right? And then we can send this message, and now we are basically responding to it. So we see here the message that was sent, and we see a response from the centraXX system. And if everything went well, I should see an acknowledge somewhere. Oh, it's too small. There it is. There's an acknowledge message. So we send back a message basically to the sending system and say acknowledge. That's a ACK. We got it and it worked. And now we've basically taken this message and put it into centraXX data. Right. So again, I know this is not showing you too much. I just want to show you the very, very basic flow of how this works. And then in centraXX, when we go back, now if all went well, if I run this search, there we go. Here is our John Smith. And so I just want to show you just very easily, right, what we've taken in. So we've taken in identifiers, right? We've created a new identifier for the centraXX patient, and then we have an MPI that we read from the message. We have a pseudo ID that was created. We have an organization unit. So what department in the hospital is this patient from? We can tell, okay, the source system, where was this patient record created? It was an HL7 message. We have first name, last name. We have sex, okay, female. This is just an example message. I don't know if that makes sense for John Smith, but you never know. We have a date of birth. We have a birth name, a place of birth, etc. So let me go into the record. Let me see if there was more data associated. This is just a very simple example. So there may just be the demographic information. Not sure, do we have an episode? Yeah. So for example, there was an episode in that message as well, right? With, for example, an attending doctor. George Batman was the doctor. So our developers made this message or changed the content of the message. I guess they had a little bit of fun here. So there's certain data from that very small ADT message that we just read that automatically, instantaneously goes into centraXX. And so that's kind of how the HL7 listener works. We get access to a continuous stream of HL7, and we can parse those out and read them and import records and import the data within. We can update the data. So the primary system, if it sends us an update, then of course we automatically instantaneously change the value that was initially saved and entered into the updated value. We can delete information from the system if the message tells us to do so. So that's basically very simplistic or simply shown how the HL7 interface functions. Are there any questions to that piece? Doesn't sound like there are. Let me just go through and see. I'm not sure if there was any other information that was extracted from that. Maybe not.
Thank you for showing us once more the importance of HL7 format.
Yes, absolutely. So I mean, again, this is the ideal situation, is because that's what of course, you're using the hospital information system for, right? We're not telling you, okay, now you have to go in here and you have to type off all of this information again, right? That doesn't make any sense. Of course not. So yes, we ingest that information from the HL7 and bring it into centraXX and make it available. Okay, let me maybe take a short break and look back at your questions real fast to make sure that I'm going in the right direction here. So this was basically the electronic patient record. We took a look at that in very much detail, and then also how the HL7 interface functions. Again, a very simple example, of course. The EPR can be called as a core form for a patient. If yes, would it be possible to tailor the clinical trials sub-databases, ECRFs, according to the study requirements? Please show the possibility of creation of additional forms in centers, and please present the interoperability of these forms with the core EPR record. Is there any possibility to the automatic queries forming? Okay, so I'm not sure I understood the entirety of the question, but what I do think is the core form of the EPR. This is what we're looking at right now in centraXX, right? This is what we call our EPR, our electronic patient record, and most of the data here would be fed by the EPR of the hospital information system. So we're duplicating the relevant data sets here from the hospital information system record into the centraXX record. And now what we can also do is not only take in data from the hospital information system, but if I understood the question correctly, we also have sub-databases, ECRFs, etc. Now there's multiple possibilities to approach the ECRF and clinical trial piece. The first opportunity, and this is something, of course, I'm from the Kairos team and the IQVIA team, we would love to see you use the functionality that we have out of the box to create forms, to design studies, and to actually document a clinical trial or a project or other type of patient-centric documentation with centraXX, with the live system of centraXX, without using another system and integrating it, but using another system, but using the centraXX system to actually document the clinical trials. So what we can do is we can go into what we call study preparation in the CTMS part, and we can say, okay, I'm going to just take an example here. And again, I have to try to focus on what I want to show because there's so much to show, but let me just start with the general data. So first of all, we can set up a study and we can say, okay, this is a clinical study. This is we have different types. This could be a population-based study or a register study. In this case, we have a clinical trial here. We have various statuses that this trial can be in. So we can say, okay, we're setting up, first of all, a test phase in centraXX. This is a centraXX test phase. And after that, we can say, okay, then we want to go into a training phase. Then we want to move it into a pilot phase. And once that pilot is successful, then it's the main phase. Then we're actually documenting the clinical trial. So there's various statuses there. And there's a whole lot of additional functionality that we have to actually set up these trials and to execute study documentation. And what we do is we can use forms, we can use ECRFs to then actually capture the information needed for the various visits within the study. So we can say, for example, a very simple form here for demographics. We can say, okay, let's edit this template here. And we see the library for this clinical trial. We see, okay, on April 4th, it was created for the first time. Then we moved into a version 2. Now version 3 of this form is live. And now if I make changes and save this form, we would have version 4. Let me just take a look at this form here for demographics. We have built it out, first name, middle name, last name. We can build in logos. We can build in URLs. We can build in any type of data field here. So we can say, okay, this is a date field for date of birth. This is a drop down with all of the countries from the ISO list for the country list, et cetera, free text fields, date fields, selectors, et cetera. We built this out. And what we can now also do, and this is a question that I think you were asking about, how do we integrate this to the core EMR, be it the core EMR in the hospital information system or in centraXX, because a lot of the data that is being collected in a clinical trial already exists somewhere in a good source system and does not need to be entered a second time. So what we can do here is we can say, I'm going to edit this point, the first name, and we call it EDC. And what that means is we can say, okay, use EDC here, and now we can link it to a data field from the EMR, from the core field, or core record, or whatever it was called. So this is linking it to the centraXX data item. So what we can say is, okay, unfortunately we don't have the first name in here yet. I thought we did already have that, but if that field was, for example, for citizenship, we can say, okay, use the data item citizenship for this field. Let me see if I can find a better example here. Date of birth should definitely exist. Let me go into that. Okay, I'm already using it. So I'm saying, okay, use the EDC, use the core record to pre-populate this field. And we have various ways of using that integration between the centraXX core and the ECRF system here in centraXX. We can either say, if there is a value in that field, automatically pre-populate it. So that if a user goes in and says, okay, now I want to document this form here, this demographics form, I want to start using it to document it for a specific patient, then they would see the date of birth is already pre-populated. There's already a value in there, so they don't have to enter it again because it's coming directly from the source system, from the core EMR. There is also the possibility of saying, okay, I want it to be semi-automated. I want it to be available there, but a user still has to sign off on it. A user still has to validate it, has to go in and say, yes, this is the correct value. So both is possible. And so again, this can be for various fields. This can be linked to existing source data from centraXX. And since the source data is actually coming from the hospital information system, it's really linking data through from the hospital information system into the ECRFs and trying to provide this in order to save as much time for the documenting personnel as possible, to pre-populate it, to have the source data available in the ECRFs. So we're still in the preparation part here, right? We're building out our forms. So we're saying, okay, which of these forms do I want to use for this study? And we'll see the documenting part in a bit. But we can build out these forms. We can say, okay, it's a multi-site study, right? We can build out different study centers. And within those study centers, we can have different users with different roles, with different access rights to the clinical trial. So we can say the admin user here has the study admin role. We have various numbers of study nurses, PIs, monitors, QA users, and I have whoever that is, a PI in here as well with different roles from, until, etc. And so this can be built out for different study centers with different access rights to the same study, but for different study arms, for example. We have serious adverse events that can be tracked. We have a study layout for clinical monitors. We have randomization tools. So we can say, okay, depending on various stratification rules, depending on gender, age, and whatnot, we can create different rules for randomized enrollment into separate study arms in the system. All right, and then what we say is, okay, we're creating a study layout for the actual data capture. All right, so we can say our study is built up out of a baseline visit, and within that baseline visit, we have different events. So we have a demographics form needs to be filled in. We need to schedule the visits. There's a form for that. There's a form to track concomitant medication. There's a form to track vital signs, et cetera, et cetera. And these forms here can be used as the primary documentation system to actually start having the study nurses log into the system and start documenting that. The PIs going in, signing off, saying, yes, this form is valid, all the data is there. The monitors going in saying, yes, there's no validation discrepancies. These forms are validated as well. So the full documentation cycle can be carried out with centraXX. So let's just take a look at that, what that documentation looks like. So let me just go ahead and log out here as the admin user and go in as a study nurse into the system. Take a look at this in a bit here. So let me just say, okay, so this is my dashboard here as the study nurse now. Of course, I'm no longer God. I can't see the identifiers for certain records here, but I can go into the study data capture and I can say, okay, I have access to one of these 3 study centers, right? We saw that the study preparation had 3 different study centers, but I'm in Dr. Foden's team and I can go into Dr. Foden's study center and I can take a look. Okay, here are all of the study members in my in the study arm that I have access to, right? I may have access to one study arm. I may not be able to see any study members in the other arms. So all of that is fully configurable, designable, and then I can go in and say, okay, for a certain study member, I want to, I don't know, add demographics information in this case. So I'm coming in and I'm saying, okay, first name is, last name is, etc. And what I can do now is I should be able to go in and say, okay, that didn't work for that patient. Maybe they don't have a date of birth documented yet. Let me try that for someone else. Because what I should ideally be able to show, there we go, okay. In this case, it's already populated into the field because this date of birth, January 1st, 1985, already exists in the core record. Right, so I don't have to go in and then enter this by hand. It's already there. It's already available. It's pre-populated. And so we can design these types of rules for pre-populating the fields for various data fields that we want to grab and put into the ECRFs. And this is, I apologize because this is, of course, the easiest of easy examples, just the date of birth. But of course, this could be lab values as well. So if we're talking about certain lab values that were entered into a system and that already exists, and we don't want to go in here and we don't want to have someone type it off and then double check and make sure that the values were correct, we can pre-populate these ECRFs with any types of structured information that we can map in the background. And that's what I was showing you with the EDC functionality, is saying, okay, this data item refers to this data field in the centraXX system. And we can go all the way. I was just showing you the user interface potential that we have to say, okay, let's set up some rules to say, okay, let's populate these fields in and over there. We can design full interfaces in the background. So we've done this for a few projects where we're saying, okay, we're taking the source data from the hospital information system and we're mapping them directly into the ECRF. And that's, of course, that's some back-end work, that's some development work. We need to understand the logic. We need to build out ETL processes, so extracting the data, transforming the data, and loading the data into centraXX. But we've done that for multi-site studies, for international multi-site studies, where we're helping individual sites extract the source data and putting them into these types of ECRFs. But of course, the ECRFs can also be used to come in and say, okay, what's the country of residence? It's okay. I was hoping I might have Czech Republic in there, but anyways, and it's I don't know, Highbury Street or whatever. And so it can be used to actually come in here as personnel to document in these forms and to go through an entire workflow here of finalizing a form, then the next user comes in and signs off on the form, then the next user comes in and validates the form, etc. And we have all this functionality here, commenting on the forms, putting flags into the form saying, I don't know, here, missing or whatever, creating user tasks and assigning these forms to the user task and sending them to another user, please fill in the missing fields here. So there's a lot of functionality within the CTMS component to actually start documenting clinical trials in centraXX and using a mix between, okay, there's certain data from the source systems that we can pull in, but there's other data that we want to collect here in the system. And then lastly, and then I want to take another break because I want to get some feedback again from your side. Lastly, we can also include the patients themselves. So we've done this for some clients where we've said, all right, okay, we have a portal that is open to the patients themselves, and this can either be via mobile application where the patient downloads an app, a centraXX app, and then gets questionnaires from that component that I just showed you, from the CTMS component, those questionnaires that are made available to patients, and they can enter data on their cell phones, or other clients use it as like a portal for the patients to log into. And of course, they can't run any searches, they can't do anything in the system here, but they can go in and say, okay, there's a certain study, and within that study, there's a risk calculator that I have to fill in. And so this is a form that the patients then actually fill in and add information for a clinical trial, for a survey, for patient-reported outcome measures. These types of forms can be built and can be made available to patients, so that it's not only the study personnel documenting, but it's also patients alleviating some of that documentation work by adding valuable information either from wearables or from the mobile phone. Okay, now I've been speaking a long time again. I wanted to show you a little bit of the CTMS functionality, but maybe I can take a quick break and get some feedback on what you saw. And was that the question that you were looking for? Subsystems, ECRF systems, and then linking it to the core EMR.
Okay, thank you very much. And Teresa, will we have the patient access in CTMS module of centraXX, or it's something additional which is not covered by the agreement?
I am not sure, but I will double check the contracts. Just do you remember if we
Yeah, I do
included?
not remember that we had included it initially, but and I want to make this statement very clear from Cairo's side. We want to give you whatever you can use in the beginning. We just also want to be very clear. We have a very limited amount of service days that we can provide to you. So what we're not looking to do, especially in this pilot, is we're not trying to restrict access to certain functionality because we're not charging you anything for licenses in this first stage anyways. So we want you to use as much as you possibly can. The only thing where we have to kind of be careful is, okay, we only have a limited amount of services days. So if we give you all this functionality, we just don't want there to be any disappointment when we can't really support you anymore on certain questions or on certain build outs. And then you'd have to kind of tinker with it and use the functionality yourself. But I would say absolutely no problem to add this if we needed to just say, sure, you can have the license, right? For the POC anyways, right? For the POC, you can use this license and play around with it. It's just we have not calculated any services for training your users on how to do this, and et cetera. So that's where I just want to be a little bit careful, but this type of functionality, not an issue to make it available. What it does here, just to add a little bit more context, is it also gives a reading view on the data, right? Of course, you can take this out also. You can set it up however you want to use it. You can just say, oh, I just want a patient to log in and to add information to a questionnaire. But some of our clients say, okay, we need to be able to be GDPR compliant. We need to be transparent with the data that we have. And so a patient has the right to see, okay, what consent information is stored on me? What diagnostic information is there in the system on me? What medication information do you have on me? And theoretically also to be able to extract this data in a structured form and provide them to external physicians, et cetera. So that's another use case that we have here, or upload documents, upload GP forms or letters, et cetera. So
Sorry,
yeah,
Jesse,
again,
Did
sorry.
you get a response? I will double check the contracts whether we have included CTMS in there. But as Jesse said, we can definitely give you the license. It's just about those services that we should fit in those 16.5 days.
Okay.
Thank you.
I have a technical question. Is it possible to migrate, to transfer the data from the trials that are already existing and that are in XML or whatever database to the CTMS system? so that we don't
Yes,
have made it again anew?
correct. Yes. So that is possible technologically. I'm going to be very honest. It's not necessarily something. It's not drag and drop magic. That can take a lot of work to migrate existing data into ECRFs. But we've done it before, and so I'm not trying to scare you or anything. I'm not. It's absolutely possible, especially if the initial source system that you have gives it out in a sensible, structured format that we can work with. Then yes, we've done that before. For example, from RedCap systems, that we've taken CRF data and we've mapped it against our format and uploaded it so that yes, that study data can be made available in the centraXX system as well.
Yeah, maybe I have also a question. This is my first time I see this system, so this will be maybe some basic question. Could you please show us how, because majority of clinical trials we do are sponsored by pharma companies. So it's we use their vendors, their systems, their ECRF, etc. So could you please show us how your system can help in commercial clinical trials with, I don't know, patient identification or some data complete.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That's a very good point. So yes, that is very true. When we have a pharma sponsored trial and they say we already have an ECRF system that you have to use, absolutely. Then what I showed you can be used for a lot of IIT studies that you may have that you may be running. So if you have systems that you're not entirely happy with, you want to be able to use a new kind of very flexible ECRF system, then that's what I just showed you with the CTMS. But absolutely right. Another layer of functionality is to go into what we call the study register. And this was definitely included in the POC. I definitely remember this part, which allows you to basically keep track of clinical trials in a large library, so to speak. So we have 760 studies in here, and this is actually even built off of an interface that we've developed to clinicaltrials.gov, where we can ingest the study information from another registry from clinicaltrials.gov and make it visible here. And so I'm sure you're well aware of clinicaltrials.gov, or you may also have national registries in place that are used. And so what it does here is it allows us to keep track of, I like to call it, it's more the static information about clinical trials. This is taking a while to load, I apologize. Such as, for example, the URLs behind it. We have a URL description field here. We have date fields. When was this trial first posted? Outcome measures, time frames. There's not a lot documented. Here we go. A brief title, et cetera, et cetera. So all of this data that you would have in registries is made available here. And again, we have a kind of a hybrid solution here. This can either be ingesting data from a registry, or it can be used to start documenting on a clinical trial as well. So if you have a sponsored trial with a certain protocol, et cetera, you can go in here and you can start documenting it according to the fields that you would know from clinicaltrials.gov, or you build out your own profile. If you say, okay, we have a certain set of data for clinical trials, but it's really just the sponsor name, the study type, the study centers. You build out these forms in the user interface. And let me just show you that very briefly before I go into the patient finding component, because I think that's really what you're asking about also. But I do want to kind of keep this line of thought here real fast. So let me go into a study profile. And let me just take, I don't know, I don't want to tinker around with the clinicaltrials.gov layout because that is important for the interface. But what we have here is, for example, I've built out a project study profile. And now I say, okay, I'm only keeping track of the start date, of an end date, of who's the director, and I have a free text field for notes. But now I also want to add another field in here, and I want to say, I don't know, study type. I should probably already have that form. That data type. Here we go. Study type from clinicaltrials.gov, for example. So I want to add that over here. And now this is available for the documentation of these types of studies. So this is the profile, the layout that I'm changing here, and then I can go into the study register and say, okay, now I want to document a new project with these data fields here. And I can build out my own data fields. I can say, okay, I want to create a new field, for example, sponsor, right? And then I give it a code sponsor, and then I say, okay, what type of data field is this? Right? Is this a free text? Is this a file upload field? Is it a decimal value? Is it checkboxes? And in this case, actually, it might make sense to say, okay, this is a sponsor. I have a list of sponsors that I work with at MMCI. And now for this field, I want to say, okay, right, this is the vocabulary that we have behind it here. And so now I could say Roche. Do I have Roche in here? I don't have Roche in here. So I can make a new entry. I can say Roche, save it. And now I can add multiple sponsor names and apply it and say, okay, code is already in use. Okay, we don't want to duplicate entries. So this is just a very simple example anyway, so let me just go ahead and select the sponsor then. There we go. And again, this is my test database here, so there's a lot of nonsense in here maybe, but okay, I have a catalog behind here. These are just contacts. These are not real sponsors, so I should probably edit this data item. But anyways, I'm building out these data items, and I can pull them over, drag and drop, and then I can build out my profile, and then I can use these profiles to go in and say, okay, in my study registry, I'm now keeping track of a new study of a new clinical trial, and I add all the data points that I have there. And I should not have taken the clinicaltrials.gov one because it's a little bit bigger. All right, and then once I've documented that, the next thing I can do, and this is going into the element of now identifying patients for a clinical trial. What I can do is I can say, okay, I'm selecting my clinical trial, and I think I have an example in here. Synovial fluid, I think I built this one out. There we go. I can build out structured inclusion and exclusion criteria into the study. Right? So I can say, for this study, I want to make sure to flag, I want to make sure to find patients that are female, that have a certain ICD-10 code, that have a certain age, that have certain consent kind documented in the system. So I'm allowed to recontact them, then have a certain pregnancy questionnaire answer, etc. And so I build these out. I can add criteria down here, and I have a drop down where I can select from any structured data item in centraXX that is relevant, where I can say, okay, this is a patient-centric value. I want to add, I don't know, citizenship, right? So I can take a type of citizenship that I want to limit it down to, etc. Any type of data item in centraXX can be added here. And I'll be very honest and very careful. Of course, we know how complex these protocols and these inclusion and exclusion criteria can get. So what I would say here is what we're doing is really a first level of screening. We're doing really, okay, the lab values that we have in centraXX, the ICD-10 codes, the age, the sex, all of the things that we see here, or these measurement findings that we can add. So certain radiology values from those findings, we can add all of that data here and quickly, that's the advantage, quickly try to flag potential matches for a clinical trial. I've seen a lot of inclusion and exclusion criteria that are so complex that I'll be honest, I would not be able to build them into here. So where there's a lot of dependencies, where it says, okay, a certain lab value is admissible, but only if a certain medication had been given 5 years prior, but not 4 years prior, and only if so once there's a certain depth of complexity to those inclusion and exclusion criteria, what our clients do and what they're most interested in is they just don't want to lose potential matches, right? That's the main problem they're facing right now, is they can't identify potential hits in the first place. And that's what this functionality does really well, is these simple inclusion and exclusion criteria, we can search by them. And we can say, okay, I want to build in a threshold. I don't want to search for only 100% hits because there may be a bottleneck, especially if the search becomes a little longer and more complex. So I want to say, okay, 70% is good enough for now, right? Then I may want to invite them into a screen, and then someone, clinical personnel, really needs to go into the detail to answer those complex dependency questions of certain medication only if certain other conditions are given. Someone has to go in to really evaluate that. But to find patients that have this type of information in the hospital information system, right? That's where, again, this source data ideally is coming from. And a mix, of course. This can also be data that is entered in centraXX. Now I'm searching against all of the patient information that I showed you in the first half of the demo, right? All of the data from the record, the age, the diagnostic information, the therapeutic information, the episode information, biobank information. All of that data can be searched here. This is a relatively large database, so it's taking a second, but now it should show me, it should flag to me. These are the patients that match at least 70% of the criteria that you just entered. And while it's still working in the background here, we have the potential to either do this manually. So this means I'm going in and I'm running this search, and then I can evaluate the result list that I'm getting. We have also built out automated functionality where these inclusion and exclusion criteria are constantly checking against the data. They're constantly looking, do I have a patient that matches this? Especially relevant when we're talking about, for example, rare diseases, right? We want to flag them as quickly as possible. So we can build in this automated functionality where it would notify someone via email, for example, the PI that's looking to run this trial would say, hey, take a look, centraXX found 2 new patients, right? They just popped up from HL7, from the HL7 message from the hospital information system. These are potential, high potential VIP patients for your clinical trial. You should get in contact with the following department. That's where they are right now. So that's kind of the concept behind it. In this case, what I've done is I've run it manually, and now I can go in and I can review, and I can say, okay, let's take a look at Linda. And the name here because I'm God in the system. I'm the admin. Typically, other users would be running the search and they would not see who this is. They would just see, aha, there is a record there with an identifier that I can use to contact someone who is allowed to see this record, right? So I would not see that name. In this case, I'm admin, so I can. Reason is no
Okay,
match.
now it's again.
Okay.
Apologies?
We didn't hear you for a
Oh,
while.
I'm sorry. Oh, no. I hate that because now I have no idea how long was I monologuing without being heard. Was it a minute or longer?
No.
60 seconds.
A minute.
One
Let's
minute.
Okay, it was
we're talking about the system waiting for available patient at different institutions that will be susceptible for acceptance to the trial.
exactly great. So had I already mentioned the manual versus the automatic? Did you catch that piece?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay. So basically what I can do now is I can create this list and I can filter by, okay, I have some 100% hits and they're already reserved. They're already flagged as this is a high potential patient. And I also have ignored patients in here, so I don't need to see them again or I don't need to review their data. And here in this case, what I'm seeing is I have a lot of matching criteria, right? I have these are the answers from the EMR core record that matches my search criteria, but I do also have a mismatch. I do not have an ICD-10 C69-2 in this record. Excuse me. And so this may be a hard exclusion. This may be a hard no, where I would say, okay, I want to ignore this patient because this is not a match, right? But there may be other cases. Let me see if I can find another example. No, it's the same thing. Okay, I don't know. There may be other examples where it's just the value was not given in a certain time frame. The value was a week after or week before. And maybe that's not a hard exclusion criteria. Maybe that's we can still propose them and we can still go into a screening phase where we're taking a look at their records and really evaluating manually, more to speak, so to speak, the more complex dependencies to then decide on whether or not to enroll this patient into a clinical trial. So this is some of the patient finding capabilities that we have in centraXX, where we can go and say, okay, for each of the studies that we have in the system here that we're documenting in our study register, we can create inclusion and exclusion criteria, and they can be used either for automatic notification to the PIs, or this can be a role that someone has to actually come in and to review and to check and to go in and flag records that may be valuable for screening and for enrolling into a clinical trial. Was that the answer to the question that we just had? So if we're talking about sponsored studies, to be able to identify patients and to find those patients and enroll those patients into the clinical trial. Was that
Yes.
helpful?
Yes.
Great.
And
Great.
Jesse,
Yeah.
can we find by elastic search some cohort of patients which will be mentioned for analysis or something like that for some publication? And is it possible to export data of these patients?
Yes. So let me go into the Elasticsearch, into the extended search. So what we can do here is we can build out searches just the way or very similar to the way we did it for the inclusion and exclusion criteria. What we can do is we can run these or save these searches. Let me take a look. I think this one is quite good as an example. So very similar to what I just showed. And now I'm looking for patients that are older than 5, younger than 21, female, have a certain diagnosis, have certain biospecimen information, have a certain answer to a questionnaire, to a pregnancy questionnaire within a certain time frame. Now, so we can run this search here. And now we're just going to get the entire list of patients. And what this is typically used for is this is typically used to create cohorts for additional work steps in centraXX. So say, okay, these are all high potentials. So what we can do is we can flag them and we can say, okay, create, let's go into the watch list and say, I want to create a task. Should be able to do that here. A user task with these patients, right? So I found a list of patients. Now I'm adding them to a task and I'm saying, please review, right? And I'm sending them to, I don't know, QA user or whatever, to a group of users, etc. So this is one way of working with centraXX to run searches, to identify patients, to identify samples, to identify studies, and then I can use them to create user tasks, or I can go into the individual records and start documenting some things, or I can document in bulk, etc. Your question though, so I just wanted to show you, this is the functionality that we have, and there are certain, let's call it, limited capabilities here of extracting data from these patient records from the user interface, right? We can either say, okay, I want to export just this table here, and I can slightly configure the table. So I can say, all right, I don't only want email and blood group, etc. I also want consent information to this table, right? So I can add that on the fly. Becomes quite big here because some patients have a whole lot of consent information associated to them, etc. So I can build out these columns a little bit, but this is not, of course, the full extent of data from centraXX. That we do not have in this user interface capability of extracting the data. We extract data, or we help our clients extract the data in other ways. So this is really just for the user interface to create cohorts, to then work with those cohorts. If you're looking for more statistical analytics and exporting data sets for other systems, for example, what we do is we have the BERT engine, Business Intelligence and Reporting tool, which allows extracting data from the database in more, let's say, analytical fashion than what I just showed you with the extended search. The extended search is really just for quickly identifying records and then further working on those records. And there's some limited extraction capabilities that we have of exporting data from those records. But there are multiple ways of really extracting data in more usable form. Either we build out reports, and let me see if I have any kind of example. This is really not, the examples I have here are really not extracting a whole lot of patient information. So for example, what I have here, this is more a biobanks centric report, is extracting data at a certain time, right? So this was executed a few days ago, 4 days ago. And so this is the database values that were received on October 20th. So there's a snapshot of data here, and this is sample centric. So I'm counting how many samples do I have of various sample types in the biobank, and what's the breakdown. So how much percent of my biobank is liquid versus tissue, et cetera. I'm breaking that information down. But these types of report templates can be used for any data in centraXX. So anything that we have in centraXX from the patient record in the ECRFs, anywhere stored in the system, can be queried with this business intelligence reporting tool and can be used to visualize and compute data. And so what we do here is we have workshops that we offer to our clients where we teach them how to build out these templates. Because you upload a template to the centraXX system, and then that becomes available for executing these reports. And either we build them out for you, right? You commission them. You ask us, hey, we need to be able to pull out all ECRF data from a patient, and we want the report to function so that a user says, okay, I have a start date and I have an end date, and now export all of that information and add certain lab values from another system that went into centraXX. And this is the layout that we want. This is the type of report we need. So we either build that for you, or if you're planning on building out these types of reports for extracting data and for analyzing data, we teach your users how to build these templates themselves to be able to do that. So that's one way of getting to the data, is using the business intelligence reporting tool, the reporting engine here, to extract the data. Another way of doing it is using the XML interface, because the XML interface allows importing data as well as exporting all patient data from the system. So what we can do here is, let me take a look. Do I have a, no, I'm not in a patient record yet. Let me go into, I don't know, a Peter Pan record here. And now I can say export this data as an XML. Let me go ahead. And so then all of the information from this record is now pulled together into this XML that I'm opening, right? And so all of the information we have, and what the format here behind this is the centraXX XML, right? So if you import a file that has this exact same layout, you can create patient records, or you can update patient records, or you can delete patient records. So we can also use this as an interface technology. And the same goes for exporting that data. So if you have IT personnel who can then use these XMLs to pull out certain data sets and make it available for analytics as well. That's what a lot of our clients do as well. Is so they use our XML interface not only for sending data to centraXX, but for extracting data from centraXX and using it as machine readable in a machine readable form for using it for other systems, for either communicating with other systems, sending data to other systems, or extracting data for analytics purposes as well. So this is the full patient record that we have here with all of the data. So with all of the CTMS data, well, okay, there's no CTMS data for this patient, but if there were CTMS data here, it would go into this field, into the appropriate fields as well within the XML. So those are the ways that I can think of where we say, okay, we can extract data. One more way, let me go ahead and show you that, because this is either using the XML interface to export patient-centrically all information, or to use the reporting tool to extract certain data and or to also use the report formats to visualize the data and compute the data. Or lastly, another possibility that I can think of is using the CTMS tool. If you have the CTMS tool, what you can do is you can create data exports. Okay, sorry, that was the wrong field. I wanted to look for this one, yes. Okay. We can go in and for a clinical trial, so for all of the CRF data that we have, we can say, all right, I want to build an export of the CRF data. And this has some certain standards that you're well aware of, SPSS or CDISC formats. So standard formats again, where we can say, all right, I'm creating now an export template that I then want to use, and I can say, okay, I only want to use it for, I don't know, concomitant medication forms. I don't want to use this for all of the forms, just for a certain form, or of course for all of the forms, whatever. So I design rules here, and then I use that export metadata file that I created to actually export data from the trial. So I can go in here and I can say, all right, now I want to run the data export, and I want to run it as this one. I want to run the CSV one. Right? And so now it's creating a CSV file with all of the CRF data, with all of the entries for all of the patients within that clinical trial, and it will give me back, once it's done here, in the following, so I can go and pull that up in a second. In the following path, I would have an export file for the clinical trial. So that's another way of using the user interface to export data. And again, this would only be study data. This would only be data from the ECRS, but that would be some configurability of exporting data. So I wanted to be very clear, because I knew that was still a question that wasn't entirely clear. So the extended search functionality that we have here out of the box is really just to quickly identify lists of patients. It's not really meant for extraction of high volumes of data. When we are talking extracting data, that would be more the reporting tool, that would be the XML interface, or that would be the CTMS capability of creating data exports from there.
And work with BERT engine is similar like work with Power BI?
Yeah, I think it is somewhat similar. I'm sure there are some differences, and again, I'm not the expert, but the business intelligence reporting tool it's freeware. It doesn't cost anything, and you can open it up, and it has similar, I would assume, very similar functionalities to BI. I don't think it's as powerful as Power BI, to be honest, but there are certain queries that you can build out, certain calculations that you build in, and then it creates an SQL query to the database, and that's really what the template then is in the end. Is it's a complex SQL query that you can then use to query the centraXX database.
Thanks.
Okay, let me see. Let me go maybe back, or do you have further questions? I'm happy to go back and take a look at the question list also. Did kind of touch on the study register, patient recruitment we touched on, the inclusion and exclusion criteria. Results, yes. There was one question in here that I wasn't entirely sure that I understood also. All right, yeah, here, if it kind of starts here. Would it be possible to search for matching studies for next treatment line? It's a matter of time. We should think about future possibilities for the patients on ongoing treatment. How proactive can the system be? Could it automatically display potential clinical trials at some points? For example, at any treatment change decision for new patients after CT scan, etc. Okay, so this is basically you're asking for how could we support the process of let's see, like clinical decision support enhancement, kind of like how can we recognize, oh, there was a certain value that was entered into an ECRF. Maybe there's another line of treatment that would be better for this patient over here in another clinical trial. Is that kind of the question? Am I getting that into the right direction there?
It was question of Misha Hanakova. She isn't here now.
Okay, no worries.
Maybe it was question on the possibility of patient recruitment to clinical study as the next treatment line. I don't know.
I understand it as so that a patient fails one study, but if there is another alternative study that he might still enter. Is that a question?
Maybe.
So
Yeah,
it,
so
it offers another possibility. So study number one is dead, but the patient still would be applicable to study two.
Right. So, I mean, I think the same mechanisms that I showed you would be applicable to that use case. There's no magic automatic functionality that I have in mind here that I could show you, but it would be, of course, the patient data is still there. And so if we update that data by saying, okay, there was an ECRF value that was entered, for example, there was a CT scan here, then of course that data becomes available again for that search mechanism that I showed you to say, okay, now this patient is viable for this next study. They've fallen out of the first study. They're no longer a good match for the first study, but there is this second study here. So there's, of course, that functionality is still there. I think the magic that I can think of, and let me actually go to the workflow engine and see if I can find that workflow because it is kind of cool. I like it. Let me see in the workflow tasks. Here, okay, this is one. So you'll have to apologize the German, but I hope this works. So there's two scenarios of the workflow engine, or of this workflow, and the reason I'm showing the workflow engine is because, okay, that one wasn't going to work. Let me see if I have. Okay, maybe I can start this one. The reason I'm going into this, this is unfortunate. Okay, let me just see if I can show any. Unfortunately, I don't think I'll be able to show the OCR or NLP ones. That's too bad. I wanted to show those. Those are cool. But, okay, there's something wrong with I think I just updated the system. Unfortunately, I don't think I'll be able to show them here, but maybe, let me just show the process image. Is that going to work? Okay. All right, too bad. If I have enough time, I might be able to make like a short screencast of this, or show you another round of demos. But what this is this allows us to build out in the workflow engine certain processes according to your rules, and this can have some automation to it and some nice magic to it, where, for example, if we trigger a process and say, okay, a patient is being enrolled into a study, what we can design is we can design a rule that says, all right, now I want you to constantly check against a certain value. And if that value is ever reached, if anyone ever documents something for this patient in this clinical trial, then we want you to automatically create a warning message for a specific user and say, hey, patient A has reached a critical value in this form. They no longer are viable for trial A. They have to be sent to trial B. There's trial B over here, and they fit into that, but they can't, or the next line of treatment, and they have to go in there. So what we can do is we can build out rule-driven processes according to whatever it is you need, and that's where we can kind of build in that magic. So there's not out of the box something that I can show you right now, but there is the potential of building out these workflows to adhere to the rules that you have in order to do those kinds of things, to automatically detect, there was a certain value here, now this patient has to go into some other line of treatment, for example. And yeah, unfortunately, I can't show you because this is just the swim lane diagram. This just shows us where in the process we are right? What's happening next, and shows us basically, okay, we have an admin who does certain things in this process, then the research institute does certain things, etc. And so in order to, this is just an example, to enroll a patient into a clinical trial, all of these gatekeepers, all of these triggering, all of these rules have to be met so that we can then finally, in the end, the admin can say, yes, now I'm putting my stamp of approval on this. This patient can be enrolled into a clinical trial. So there's a lot of, sorry, was there a question?
Can this process use the results of regular searches as you showed before? Because it would be, can this process and or diagrams use
Yeah.
results or lists made with regular searches based on some rules? Because
Yes.
this would solve the problem.
Yes, absolutely. So what the workflow does is the workflow, either we can say we're using existing functionality in centraXX. That's the very easy way, because then we're really kind of like plugging in existing code, existing forms, and we're saying, okay, the first task is a user runs the search, right? And so then we just display the search, and then the user can use that technology and run the search. Then we say in the workflow, the second step is now someone has to upload a document. And that may be a form that we then have to build, right? So we have multiple tasks. The first task is a search, and that can be the standard search that I just showed you in the system, and that's very quickly done because we already have that code. And then the second one is an upload field. That's also very quickly done because it's just one field. But depending on complexity of what do you need the mask to do, it can take a little bit of development work, so we have to develop those workflows. But yes, what this is encouraging you to do is to sit down, go to a whiteboard, and say, all right, this process, we have a process here. This is how it has to work every single time. This is our standard operating procedure, and we want the system to guide the users through here so that they don't make any mistakes, they don't forget to enter data here, and we can build in magic such as the OCR, the NLP. I wish I could show you that. Sorry about that. But to extract structured information so we can develop new pieces to the system that did not exist before. So that's where we want to stay innovative. We want the system to grow and to add new functionality. This is one place where we can do it with the workflows.
And there was last question. We are looking forward to start playing with centraXX, but is there any user's manual or something like that, like instruction videos? For example, something is accessible for RedCap, I guess, like instruction videos for users and so on. Is there also?
So yeah. Yes, so we do have user manuals for the system, and really it's kind of like, okay, this is, if you're in a search, uh, you can pull up the manual that says this is how to design your search, and it gives you, a little bit of examples of how to build out that search. I'll be entirely honest, what really there's so much individual different use cases to centraXX that it's not really possible to say, okay, this is the user manual, this is how you use it, because our clients use it in different ways for different use cases. So what we typically do in our projects is we develop that type of documentation with you. We say we go and look, okay, what are your processes? And then this is the how-to that your users need. This is the documentation that your users need. We're happy to provide whatever we can right now. I'm just to be, and there is a lot. There's a lot of documentation out there. I'm not saying there's no documentation. There is. I'm just not sure how productive that will really be without having the system yet, right? Without really using the system, because it'll tell you this is how you can create a new sample in centraXX. This is how you can create a new patient in centraXX. It's information that's there, and I think what might be more interesting at a certain stage is getting your IT personnel involved with ours to really show you this is how you can use the system. Now you can start tinkering and building out your own interfaces, right? This is the XML interface, and this is the REST API. You can create calls to extract data. You can create calls to send data to centraXX. So there's documentation around that where I would say, okay, that might make sense at a certain stage to get those people involved. And also, again, I'm happy to send you whatever documentation we have and screencasts. There's some screencasts, some tutorials. You're more than welcome to look through them. It's not going to be, I don't know if it's going to be perfect for your use case. I'll be entirely honest.
Yeah, I agree. Best will be the combination both instruction
Exactly.
and also to have some basic manuals how to set a registry in centraXX and something like that. But after signing of an agreement.
Yeah, exactly. But sure, there is a lot of documentation. I've found over the years that the best documentation is the one that we develop for the clients because it's more specific than just, this is a huge PDF where, how to set up a study. Click on, button A, then you get the mask, then you can enter values. That's like, yeah, it's helpful for the very first time you kind of read it and you try to understand centraXX, but then it's like, okay, it's kind of the system is relatively self-explanatory anyways, so it's not like it will add a huge amount of value. But let me pull together what we have, and I'm happy to share that.
I got a question. So far, we've been speaking about about the situation when I have the idea of a trial and I'm looking for the patients. When I take it vice versa, I have a patient that has some rare disease or special type of sarcoma, let's say, and my possibilities are exhausted. So I want to search if there is somewhere in Germany or Europe study running that would be suitable for his case.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah. Yeah, it's a perfect example. It's a great example. So because we've seen exactly that type of requirement from the hospitals that we've been working with, so we can go into the study register and say, all right, the studies that we have here, these do not only have to be your studies. These can be other studies from other centers, and we have a lot of German clients, for example. And so there may be some studies that we could be able to share with you here, not the details of the studies, just the inclusion and exclusion criteria and just the general information that's available there. And once that inclusion and exclusion criteria is made available here, well, you can do it both ways. You can either run a search from the study, and as you were saying, I have an idea, now I have my trial, now I have the inclusion and exclusion criteria, now I want to find patients, but we can do it the other way around. We can go into the patient record that we have in front of us, and we can go into here and we can say, show me study proposals for this patient, right? And I'm not sure if I'm going to find any real relevant data here because this Peter Pan, there's not a lot of data here, but this suggests to me as a physician, hey, there's a study out there, DRKS1, that is looking for patients with, C20 diagnosis. Your patient has a C20 diagnosis and he's older than 18. Great. Maybe you should contact, that study site. Maybe this is a good match. And then we have some mismatching criteria. So again, just a demo example. But yes, the search exactly for that requirement that you just mentioned functions both ways. We can set up the study and then search for patients, but we can also go into the patient record and say, yes, as you're saying, my options are limited now, are exhausted, but let's go and check. Are there any studies? But full disclosure, this is searching against the studies in the study register in centraXX, right? So we need to have the inclusion and exclusion data in centraXX to be able to make use of that functionality. But exactly, this can either be importing data from other registries, from external registries, or it can be a manual process where you go in and you set up the study and you manually set up the study criteria here as well.
And another question, this is probably just basic, but when you spoke about how to form your CRF for your trial, I guess you can include formulas like calculators, risk calculators, and all that, so that I can enter just dimensions of lesions, and it will automatically count volume and add the volume to another risk calculator, for example. So.
Yes, absolutely. So if I go into a form here, I'm just going to take, oops, I need to edit it. Can take just a depression score form. So this is just an example that we have here, but we can go into a field and we can say we're editing it, and we can create some validation rules first of all, and this is based on Groovy, which is a JavaScript, so it's a Java language. So we can design rules against each field where we say, okay, if a certain value is reached, then there's a validation discrepancy here. Or if a certain value is entered in field A of the form and this field gets a certain value, then create a validation discrepancy. So that's one way of basically building in some logic there. And of course, we can build out a data type which is called function alphanumeric or function numeric. And let me just see if I can set this up really fast. Calculation, function, calc. And so what we can do here is also and I already have some calculators. I have a BMI calculator or cost calculator, and so I can create another calculator here. And now I can use just very simple calculator formulas here. Or I can use what we call the expert mode, which again is a Groovy expression, which again is JavaScript. So you need some development know-how, but you can build out complex calculations against a data field. So as you were saying, lesion count, I have value A, value B, now calculate what the lesion size is or whatever the circumference is. Those types of formulas, yes, you can build into data fields.
Thank you.
So another questions? No? Jesse, thank you very much for supportive, useful and impressive presentation. Thank you. We will share this record with our colleagues at the LMCI, and we will stay in touch, I hope.
Yeah, so do we. We hope very much as well. So yes, no, thank you very much also for your time. And again, I'm happy to answer any follow-up questions, to demo again. I'll try to pull together screencasts that we have and other documentation I think may be useful to you. And yeah, we really want to get moving on this. We want to support you with this. We understand how important the HL7 integration is, no question. But I think there is still also a lot of work that can be done in the meantime. These things take some time to really figure out, okay, what processes do we want to get into this system? And so we want to support you with, just as much as we can, as quickly as we can. So just let us know how we can help you continue this down the road. But again, thank you very much for your time, and feel free to reach out anytime if you have any questions.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Take care. Have a nice day. Bye.
Bye.
Vy máte nahranou tu schůzku.
Jenom jsem vám ještě chtěla poděkovat a pokud budete mít nějaké otázky, tak určitě posílejte buď mě nebo přímo kolegovi a rádi zodpovíme.
Dobře, děkujeme.